Welcome back to the show today. We are talking about the NBA draft and how it works. Obviously, from a high level, it's pretty simple, right? All the teams pick the players they want from the players that have declared for the draft that year. Then they do it again for a second round. But if you watch the draft only knowing that information, you're gonna wonder what the fuck's going on here. Why do the Atlanta Hawks have the #1 pick? They weren't even bad. They made the play-in tournament. Also, why do the Knicks have the 24th and the 25th pick? And the Nets don't even get a first-round pick this year. Well, it's obviously a little more complicated than that. But it isn't that complicated, and in a few minutes, you're gonna understand it completely. Let's start with the draft lottery. The draft lottery decides the order of the first 14 picks in the draft. And there wasn't always a draft lottery. Before 1985, it was just the order of the way the teams finished by record. The worst team got the first pick in the draft, and the best team got the 30th pick in the draft. But they changed that. Why did they change that? Because teams were tanking too hard. Imagine if it were that way last year with Wemby in the draft. Teams would have tried to lose really hard for Wemby. They would have been trying to score on their own baskets and try to defend the other team's basket. So they introduced the draft lottery to even things out. This just gives higher odds to the worst teams and lower odds to the best teams. And it's evolved a bit over the years. It started as Commissioner David Stern would reach into a glass jar full of envelopes. Each envelope had a different team's name on it. But people hated this because they thought it allowed for cheating or tampering. If you ever hear people talk about the 85 theory, this is that theory. It was that in the 1985 draft, the New York Knicks envelope was frozen so that David Stern would know that it was the New York Knicks. And he'd pull that envelope as the #1 pick. This is just a theory. But Shaq also told this story on the Knucklehead podcast.
My name is David Stern. You always know who this man is.
I met him before the draft. He says, even before the lottery, he said, you want to play where it's hot or where it's cold? And I said, hot. I'm at the draft, and he's coming up with the envelope, and he's looking at the envelope, and he goes, it was real quick. He was like, and with the first, and then he called me. So
with so much conjecture on how the NBA draft lottery was corrupt, the NBA changed the system to use a series of ping pong balls, just like a state lottery. Each team has a set of combinations that the balls might align to. The worst teams have more combinations. There's a select group from each team that get to watch the ping pong balls come out. That way they know there's no funny business going on. Here's how the lottery odds break down. First of all, the only teams that are actually in the draft lottery are the 14 teams that didn't make the playoffs. So when someone calls a player a lottery pick, it means they were chosen in the first 14 picks. All the teams that made the playoffs just go in order by record. So this year, the Heat will get the 15th pick because they were the worst team to make the playoffs. And Boston will get the last pick, the 30th pick, because they had the best record in the league. Then this is what the odds look like for all the lottery teams of getting the first pick. So the 3 worst teams have the same exact odds of getting the #1 pick. That's 14%, and then it descends from there. That's why it was pretty crazy this year that the Atlanta Hawks got the #1 pick, because they only had a 3% chance of getting it. And even if the worst teams don't get the #1 pick, they still have a very high chance of getting a high pick. The Pistons and the Wizards had the best odds of getting a high pick this year because they suck so bad. The Wizards did alright, they got the 2nd pick in the draft. The Pistons weren't so lucky, they got the 5th pick. And considering they were the worst team in the league, they were hoping for something higher. Okay, but what about the 2nd round of the draft? Is there a lottery for that? No, there's not. The 2nd round of the draft is just in order by record. The Celtics will get the 60th pick in the draft, the last pick of the 2nd round. And the Pistons will get the 31st pick, the first pick of the 2nd round. Actually, that's not true, because both of these teams have traded away those 2nd round picks. The Raptors have the Pistons pick, and the Mavs have Boston's pick. We're gonna get into trading picks in a minute, but that is how the 1st and 2nd round of the draft are designed. Well, why isn't the 2nd round of the draft treated the same way as the 1st round of the draft? Why is there no lottery? Why is it done the old school way? Well, it's because after the 15th pick, most of the selections seem to be a wash. No particular player is seen to be demonstrably better than any other player. It's more of a matter of taste or preference whether you want one player or another player. And in the 2nd round, it really doesn't matter because you're scouting based on potential. A lot of players that get selected in the 2nd round of the draft never even see the NBA. Get on any Wikipedia page for a draft in any year. You'll see a lot of players with grayed out names. That means they never saw the court in the NBA. Occasionally, you'll even see a 1st round pick that's grayed out. Also, just because a team selects a guy doesn't mean he's gonna play for that team in the following season. A lot of European players get drafted, but they wait a couple years to start their NBA career. Tony Kukoc was drafted by the Bulls in 1990, but he didn't start playing for the Bulls until 1993. The reason was he was making more money in Italy than he would have been with the Bulls. Jokic was the same way. He waited a year after he was drafted to go join the Nuggets. And David Robinson, who was the 1987 draft #1 pick, he waited 2 years to start his NBA career because he wanted to finish his service time in the military. Imagine that now. What if Paolo Banchero was starting his NBA career in September because he'd been serving in the Navy the last 2 years? That'd be wild and honorable. So you're really drafting the rights to a player. That's the contract rights for a player in the NBA. Let's talk about why the Nets don't have a pick this year and why the Knicks Knicks have 2 first-round picks this year? Well, it's because you can trade picks. And that's what the Nets did when they traded for James Harden in 2021. The Nets didn't have a pick in the 2022 draft. They don't have a pick this draft, and they don't have a pick in the 2026 draft. All that for a 2021 James Harden. If you're curious, the 2022 draft pick was Tari Eason. In a parallel universe, Tari Eason is a Brooklyn Net and James Harden never was. And now on to the Knicks. The Knicks have their own pick, the 25th pick in the draft, because they finished with the 6th best record in the league. But they also have the Dallas Mavericks pick from the Kristaps Porzingis trade. And since the Mavs finished with the 7th best record in the league, they have the 24th pick. So on draft night, a team can trade up if they really like a player, or they can trade down if they want to get an asset for their pick. This usually happens while the draft is happening. A team has 5 minutes to make their decision after the last team's selection. So a team may say, oh, a player we like is still available, but it's not our turn. So they'll call up the other team whose turn it is and say, how much would it take for you to swap picks with us? The other team might say, well, we probably don't want the player that they want, so we might as well swap picks, because the guy we want will most likely still be around if we swap picks, and we'll get some extra stuff from this team. Maybe a second rounder, maybe a first rounder, maybe a player. The example I always use is the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic. The Mavericks had the 5th pick in the draft in 2018, but it got to the 3rd pick and Luka was still available. So the Mavericks called the Hawks, who had that 3rd pick. They said, hey, pick Luka and trade him to us. We'll give you a first-round pick in the future. The Hawks were like, okay, we really don't want anyone in particular, so we'll do it. We'll take the 5th pick over the 3rd pick. We'll get a future first rounder for free. So that's why there's a picture of Luka with a Hawks hat and a picture of Trey with a Mavs hat, because those were the teams that actually selected them. That future first-round pick that the Hawks received was Cam Reddish, by the way, if you were curious. So with the worst teams getting the best picks, wouldn't players want to go lower in the draft so they can be a part of an organization that is good and has a good culture? Well, no, because the higher you're drafted, the more money your rookie contract is worth, the more you get paid. This is what the table looks like for rookie scale contracts. And as you can see, the salaries get lower the lower you're selected in the first round of the draft. Let's compare the salaries of last year's rookie class. The first pick, Victor Wembanyama, made $10 million, while the 30th pick in the draft, the very last pick of the first round of the draft, Kobe Brown, made $2 million. That's why NBA players look sadder and sadder the further they slip in the draft. They're also being rejected by every team that doesn't select them, and that hurts, but you already knew that. Teams can also lose picks as punishment. For instance, there are only 28 picks in the 2nd round of the draft this year, because the Suns, they lost their pick due to tampering violations involving conversations with Drew Eubanks that happened before free agency. You can't do that. The same thing happened with the Sixers too. They were engaged with conversations with Daniel House Jr. and PJ Tucker before they were allowed to. Again, these are just kind of slaps on the wrist though, because if you remember, 2nd round picks usually don't play much anyway, but they can also be really good. Look at Nikola Jokic. We always talk about that. Example's dumb. All right, thank you for being here. If you liked the video, like the video. If you didn't like the video, dislike the video. If you have suggestions for a video, I'll probably do it. I like taking suggestions, and if you have a good clickbaity title, that helps too. Be good to your mothers, eat a corn dog.